we have to shift. We need a cultural revolution. We are embedded in a world, and it's even more intense right now with AI just going produce, 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 consume, consume, consume. And that base model of what is important to us and what we think is valuable is, and this is going back to Pope Francis, is going back to how we live our lives. And how we live our lives, and this Western model of success continues to spread around the globe, and it continues to cause environmental havoc, social havoc, again, infectious disease continuing to exist, but now alongside chronic disease risk. We need to all ask ourselves what's truly important to us and begin to live in alignment with that.
My guest today is Dr. Paula Skye Tallman, Assistant Professor of Anthropology here at Loyola University of Chicago. Paula, great to have you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
So, water.
Yeah.
Water is necessary for life. We can only live for 3 to 4 days without it. Mm-hmm. And in preparation for today, I looked on World Wildlife Fund's website, and they said that 1.1 billion people around the world lack access to water. Mm-hmm. 2.7 billion people find water scarce for at least 1 month per year, and 2.4 billion people suffer with inadequate sanitation. Mm-hmm. These are some staggering numbers. And I think people that are fortunate enough to live in the United States may be unaware of how many people around the world really suffer from water insecurity.
Yeah.
I know that's one of your subjects of research.
Sure
Maybe
is.
we could
talk a little bit.
Go right into that.
I'd be happy to. And you're highlighting different facets of water insecurity. So I really appreciate that. We often think about issues with water just being that there's not enough water. And that's really not at all, as you're bringing up, the whole story. We have issues with access. So there can be water in the area, but people don't have access to it, particularly in their homes, which I hope we can dive into a little bit more, how important household access is. You also pointed out the seasonal shortages, and that's, again, referencing this issue of reliability. Sometimes we have water that is available, it is accessible, but it's not reliable, and that's another level of stress. And then there's the whole world of sanitation as well, which is very much linked to water insecurity, but it's a little bit different. It's about, can we stay clean? Do we have places that are safe and accessible to be able to do the business that we're all doing out there? So as researchers, we're very much interested in thinking about water insecurity in all of its dimensions, and specifically how it's influencing human health and well-being. And what we do in our lab is we specifically think about a foci that is amenable to policy or policy change, or how do we take action? Because while it's sometimes not right in our face here in the United States, we turn on a tap, we put the washing machine on, we do the dishwasher, we still do have issues as well. So we have particularly issues with water safety throughout the United States, and you've probably seen some of the headlines about perfluoroalkyl forever chemicals. Mm-hmm. So we have major issues with the quality and safety of our water here in the U.S., but not so much what we see globally, which is access and reliability.
And so you've primarily done most of your field work in Peru, mm-hmm. and then also Indonesia.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why you chose those two field sites?
Absolutely. So I stayed home with my children, and as I was struggling to keep my career alive and also be a stay-at-home mom, a colleague put out a call looking for researchers who were interested in applying to the British Academy because they had a bid for an international interdisciplinary project. And she had been working, Dr. Stromakol had been working in Indonesia, and she had observed through ethnographic research, which is what we anthropologists really like to do. We go and we spend extended amounts of time living in particular places with community members so we can understand the issues that they face on a daily basis. And while she was working in Indonesia, she observed that the women were saying that they were at a higher risk of violence and also just general stress within households because there wasn't enough water in the household. And as I referenced, when you think about all the things that we use water for, washing ourselves, washing the children, the clothes, the dishes, the cooking, the cleaning, all of it involves water in households. And what was happening was they didn't have water coming into their house. They would be walking, but the well would be empty, or it would take up half the day going to get the water. And they wouldn't be able to do all the other things in their household that they needed to do because so much time and effort was being spent on procuring water. And when their partners, typically men, would come home, they're tired, they're having a hard day as well, and they're like, where's the dinner? Why are the kids dirty? And so the lack of water was driving tensions within households. And so that was a set of observations, a small sample size. And so Dr. Cole looked for colleagues who were interested in doing a globally comparative project saying, okay, well, do we have data to support this association between water insecurity and gender-based violence, which we typically interpret as violence against women. And there's a whole range, which we can talk about. And I saw that and I said, international, interdisciplinary, water. Yeah, I'd love to. And with Dr. Cole's specialization in Indonesia and my 20 years plus working in Peru, we said, can we look at these two countries, which are both experiencing water insecurity, but really different. I mean, they're different cultural systems, they're different ecologies, although both research sites where we were working on the northern Peruvian coast is a desert ecology. And then in Indonesia, we were working on the island of Sumba, which is getting increasingly dry as well. We typically think about Indonesia as being tropical, but it's getting drier and drier. So that was the rationale, our background specializations. We wanted it to be globally comparative, and we were dealing with very, very different cultural contexts.
Mm-hmm. And is the goal to expand it to other sites as well then?
So we recently, not recently, maybe a year or two ago, we published a global review looking at this topic of water insecurity and gender-based violence. And while other scholars hadn't systematically investigated that relationship qualitatively and quantitatively, other researchers and also in the gray literature, which is not peer-reviewed work, but often done by non-governmental organizations, over and over and over, you see these relationships documented. So we synthesized that global literature, and it's clear that we see this across the world. However, most of the observations and evidence was coming out of South Asia and also Africa. So we have some gaps globally in understanding it. But I think my bigger issue is, even though I'm in the business of scientific investigation, how many times do we have to show that water insecurity is a problem? I'm more interested in what type of science can we do and how can we bring it to people who can make change in the world so we can be solutions oriented, then document those impacts so that we can continue to invest where we already know. Mm-hmm. So I'll continue to work with scholars on this topic globally, but I want to put my focus on solutions at this point.
And so is the violence perpetrated against women usually the spouse, or is it?
That's a great question. So there's a whole range, and it really does tap into cultural systems. So for example, in Indonesia, there were two findings that were outside of what we had gone in with. We had gone in thinking about mostly domestic and intimate partner violence. But what emerged is very much linked to that specific context. One, they still have a caste system in Indonesia. So there are effectively people who are slaves there. It's not quite the way we think about slavery here in the United States, but you have people who are indebted there and are of a different class and are treated very differently there. And so when we spoke to people who were in this lower caste, they said, I'm beaten because I'm not able to bring the water to the household at that time. So it's not a partner violence, it's coming from the households in which they're embedded, but not that they're biologically related to. The other piece was from in-laws. And so in Indonesia, there is a patrilocal system where when someone, so let's say a woman, marries a man, she goes to live with the man's family. And what we heard from speaking to women was Now it's almost like, so the mother used to be the one who used to have to go, as the head woman in the household, would have to go get all the water. But now there's a new person in the household who's of a kind of lower status because she's younger and newly married. And so the pressure is now on that newly married woman to take care of the water in the household. And if she doesn't, verbal assaults from the mother-in-law. And so that taps into this conversation about gender-based violence. We often think of violence as somebody's being hit, is typically what we think about. But there's economic violence where money is withheld. There is emotional violence where people are using emotions to punish them, et cetera. So we see a larger spectrum of violence being perpetrated against children as well. That was the other big finding, is that kids are the ones who are going to get water and who are being whipped or being berated when they can't access that water through no fault of their own.
But in Indonesia, they're getting verbally abused by the mother-in-law, and then they're also getting physically abused by their spouse, or?
Yeah, it could. Gender-based violence is very tricky to study. It's behind closed doors, and it's something that people are not always willing to talk about for many, many very valid reasons. So these dynamics could be manifesting in different ways in different households. There's the potential for it to be coincidental. But the other thing, going back to culture, is in Indonesia, and we could talk about the cultural salience in Peru as well, but in Indonesia, coffee is really important. So if you're having somebody over, to have coffee prepared and ready for your guests is very important. And we heard stories from women, they couldn't get enough water, they couldn't make the coffee, somebody was coming over, and then they were beaten afterwards because it was embarrassing for their partners bringing in a guest. So there's this dynamic interplay between environmental stressors, gender norms, and culturally important activities that is then manifesting in violence against women in this way.
Is the violence also perpetrated when they're going to procure the water from the source then as well?
Yes. Yeah. So we did not find that in Indonesia and Peru because the distances that are being traveled are, from the US standards, like awful, and they are awful. Where we really see violence against women happening on the pathway to and from water is in places where you're going like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day in transit. And this is happening, from what we saw in the review of the literature, predominantly in countries within Africa. And so women and children also saying, I have to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning because, number one, it's too hot if you leave too late in the morning. Number two, the line is too long. There's a risk that the water has run out. So women are leaving in the dark, which makes attacks from animals more probable because people are in these remote areas walking through the bush. And also, again, intersecting with culture, in some regions, we do have acceptance of bridal abductions. And so if a girl is abducted and raped, then it's one pathway by which marriages can come to form. And we always, as anthropologists, are really trying to toe the line between understanding different practices in different cultures and not having that immediate knee-jerk, that's weird, that's wrong, that's bad, but also what is the line when people's human rights are being violated. And I think in the case of bridal abductions, people's rights are being violated.
Well, and also in the case of slavery then as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And figuring out where your space for intervention is I think something that I've learned as I've become a bit more senior in the field. I have interests in food insecurity and access to healthcare and social support. Those are very difficult to address. Water is difficult to address, but I think it's very easy to understand. If you don't have enough water, your life is threatened and is very stressful.
And how did you get women to participate in this study? Because I would think that the fear of retribution would be pretty high.
Absolutely. The biggest component is working with our teams in country and our colleagues. So the Water Insecurity and Gender-Based Violence project that we were awarded from the British Academy included Dr. Stormacole, who's based in the UK, but also Dr. Titi Rusiidi, who is a professor of social work in Indonesia. And so Dr. Rusiidi has, she's in country, hugely important. Dr. Gabriela Simon is our Peruvian counterpart. She's an epidemiologist and a good friend of mine. And we have our whole Peru team as well. And we would not have been able to do this project because of the sensitive nature of this topic and because COVID hit right when we got the funding. And Dr. Cole and I were not able to travel to Peru or Indonesia at that time. So we had to do remote training for all of our teams and just be up at, 2 a.m. because of the time difference in Indonesia, et cetera, to be able to offer support. But really, the work was made possible because of our in-country and local collaborators.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the solutions to these water insecurity issues?
Yeah. They're easy and hard at the same time. I was on a panel recently where a colleague said, structural problems are solvable problems. And that gives me a lot of energy because they are. I mean, you know what I mean? If we've created some of these problems, we can certainly address them. The other side of that is it's about bringing water, reliable and safe water. And I would argue not just to, it is important to schools, it's important to other institutions, but into households. Because again, women are the ones in the households that we don't even understand that when we turn on a tap, what a privilege it is to have that. The difficulty is that water infrastructure is complicated by climate change, increasing the severity of water in both directions. And so, for example, in Peru, there already exists El Nino phenomena. We know that that's getting worse with climate change, but it existed before we were seeing spikes in carbon dioxide. And we have a reservoir in the area where we work, but there are no water pipes. So we work on two sides of the Piura River. And on the one side, there are the mountains in the background, and it's connected to the reservoir, and people get piped water. Not always, but when you talk to them, they say this is a big improvement to how it was a few years ago. Then we work on the other side of the Piura River, and you can see from satellite imagery, one area is green because it's got pipes to both the fields and the households, and the other area, and just right there, is totally desert, like, it's from the cowboy movies, with the bramble bush or whatever that's going down. And on that side, all of the water comes through via water trucks. And there's not enough water being delivered, and the trucks are breaking down, and people have to wait in the hot sun, and then they fill up their jugs. And you can imagine, how often are we washing our own water bottles? You can imagine how often those trucks are getting washed, the holding tanks, and then the jugs that people are bringing home. So there are multiple levels of contamination that we're documenting right now through water quality testing. Our work on this initial project was taken by the community, and they were able to advocate for a water infrastructure project to start to bring pipes over, which is super exciting. And then a bridge crumbled, and it just stopped. So, and then we went in Indonesia, and again, the community was able to advocate for some water pipes, and then we went to visit, and the water pipes are cheapy plastic, and they're right where the cows walk. It's not going to last long. The cows are going to crush it. So it's very clear what the solution is. People need not necessarily large-scale water infrastructure, but water infrastructure that is tailored to their unique context, needs, and capacity to maintain that water infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. So. I was reading in one of your papers, so the river that is close to their village is contaminated from mining companies and
and upstream.
And upstream as well.
Yeah.
So, but they often have to supplement the water from the river.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how prevalent is waterborne disease in these communities then?
Highly prevalent. And the government, again, we're always looking for levers of change. The government is very concerned about the wellness of pregnant people and also for children's health. And there's a huge focus in Peru on anemia because a lot of the kids are anemic, and there's a big focus also on undernutrition and stunting. So stunting is when there's not enough nutrients and kids may be going out this way, but they're not always growing upwards. And you can kind of do some comparisons over time and across populations to look at those trends. So the government does some food supplementation projects, which in theory is great, but you're bringing in Western packaged foods, which are often being used in replacement for the foods that have been there for a while, which all of that food that's coming in is packaged and is meant to last a long time. And so it basically means it doesn't have the nutrients that people need, but it has excess calories. So we're seeing the emergence of a double burden of over and undernutrition, where again, people are not growing vertically, but they are putting in on excess body fat. So it's at the same time that people are not getting enough to eat, they're also facing chronic diseases that are associated with Western diets. So we have that food supplementation program, and then they're also doing iron supplementation to try to address the high levels of anemia. If you have parasites, you can take iron supplements all day long and you are not going to raise your iron levels in your blood because the parasites are sucking off all of the nutrition. So it's not getting at the underlying cause. And again, I'm just getting older and crotchety. I'm like, what are the solutions? What are the upstream causes? I think it's important to understand the entire picture, but that's where I really want to put the focus. And there are not currently very comprehensive health surveys that give us a window into what the rates of diarrheal disease and more so on anemia, to be able to say, well, this is the percentage of children that are suffering from waterborne illnesses, but we know it's very, very high. I mean, you can talk to people, and when you say, what are your concerns? In Peru, the big concerns are teenage pregnancy, which is another area we could talk about, I think related in some ways. And then it's children's health. And the people in Peru with whom we're working are saying the kids, so the water comes down from the reservoir and then it's held in canals, and the canals then go to the agricultural fields, but it's hot. And so the kids go dunk themselves in these canals, but then there's agricultural runoff and a lot of things that are growing in there. And so we hear many concerns if the kids are getting sarpullidas, rashes all over. There was one case where somebody had a parasite that affected their brain. And they're consistently saying the kids have big bellies, they're full of parasites, they're not able to concentrate in the schools because they're sick. And so this is something that for our upcoming project, which again I can kind of yap about, but how do we use resources that we have in the global north to support community members with whom we are working to get reliable and safe water to children, and how can we look at children's health before and after that intervention to see what the impact is, which I would hypothesize would be significant reductions in childhood diarrheal disease. We're going to probably see better growth. People are going to be less stressed, but we should check it out with some data.
Well, so let's talk about your new project then.
Yeah.
Or your upcoming project. Can you?
I'd love to. So we have been working on the northern coast of Peru since 2019 with this initial British Academy project. And all of it is under the umbrella of action research, going back to what I keep harping on, which is how do we use science to motivate action on the community level, on the regional level, on the national level, whichever, or any place we can do that. And the way that we designed it was we did the qualitative interviews and the quantitative surveys, and we documented there are high levels of water insecurity. People in Peru would not talk about gender-based violence. So we did not find an association between water insecurity and gender-based violence quantitatively, because in the surveys, people would not report GBV.
So that's interesting. Why in Indonesia they felt comfortable reporting it, but not in Peru?
Yeah, I don't know. It could be different. There could be, because I was not able to be in the field for this due to COVID. There may be different cultural norms around speaking about personal experiences and violence. And our team in Peru said when you ask people about experiences of gender-based violence, it's as if you asked what color their underwear was.
Taboo.
Super taboo. And also, I don't want to overgeneralize in Peru, because where we're working on the coast, the people are very stressed. You can tell it's hot, it's dry, they don't have enough water, and they're, as we say, a little bit callado. They're kind of closed off. I also work in the Peruvian Amazon where there are issues with water. It has to do more with water contamination, et cetera. And in the Amazon, people are much more open to talking about all of life, and I find it's very friendly. You know? So I think perhaps the specific location, the cultural norms, it can really vary. But people in Indonesia were open to reporting gender-based violence on the survey and in interviews. People would only talk about violence secondhand and not directly did they experience it, even though when we look at the data for people going to, for example, the Emergency Center for Women, when you talk to the people who are in law enforcement, we actually had a multidisciplinary workshop where we shared the results, and when we said nobody reported gender-based violence, our partners were mad. What do you mean? And like, we know that it's happening. We said, yeah, well, that in and of itself is a finding.
Yeah.
To say, what is preventing people from reporting, or how do we adjust what we're doing as researchers to make people feel more comfortable and safe doing that?
And is to do it anonymously, is that an option for them?
It's a possibility. The reality is, if you report, and gets into the solution, the water solutions are difficult but more straightforward. The solutions for issues that have to do with gender-based violence are very, very complicated. Mm-hmm. Because if you tell somebody, if you've experienced gender-based violence, you should report it to the police, and your partner should face criminal proceedings, etc. You are potentially threatening your children's health and well-being. Because in a place like Peru and other places where there's machismo, which is like very, very rigid gender roles, where typically, not always, right, but that there are sometimes expectations that women are going to be in the households, they're going to take care of the house, and they're going to take care of the children. And then a partner, usually a man, I don't want to conflate everything, right? As a person who teaches a whole course in gender, I want to be careful about not just saying a heteronormative view of partnerships. But in these cases, it's typically a man and a woman. And the man goes out, works in the fields, works for mining companies, et cetera. He comes back, he brings in the money. So if you report that person, you are taking away the money and the food of your household. Furthermore, maybe he'll go to jail for a little bit, and he's going to come back even perhaps angrier, which could increase your risk of really, really severe violence. And these are small communities, so everybody's going to talk about it. So what are your options?
Yeah.
So we asked.
What are the options? But also, all this stuff is intertwined as well, right?
Oh, yeah. So we said this when we went back to the communities, and this is the important part about action research is we do the research, we get our findings, we go back and we say, what did you think? What do you think? Is this, are we missing something? Is this accurate? And most importantly, what are your solutions to this? And the solutions to gender-based violence for our partners in Peru were about promoting gender equality for students, predominantly. And we work with a Jesuit educational nonprofit in Peru called Fe y Alegría. Really amazing people doing amazing work to elevate public education there. And they invited us to do a series of gender equality workshops in their schools with both teachers and students. And so we're on our third year of doing gender equality workshops. And it's been really exciting and wonderful to be able to go back, see the students. We give out, certificates. And we've actually been now capturing the impact of that programming by looking, there's a United Nations gender attitude survey that we do before and after the programming to see how much are both students and teachers shifting in their stated beliefs about things that have to do with gendered roles and norms.
And what are your findings then?
Yeah. So is today Monday? I think. Friday, I crunched the data for the third round, the teachers. So the first year we did it with preschool teachers, and we didn't do the research around it. The second year, which was 2024, we did it with high school students. And then this past summer, we did it with teachers across different grades. And we have a paper we're about to submit for the high school students, and you see big changes, which is really amazing. So there are some statements, which I was talking about it with my research team this morning. So there's a statement, I think it's something along the lines of women should be treated equally to men. And before the programming, 20% of the students disagreed with that statement.
Males and females both.
We could dichotomize between the two, but we just lumped it all together. And 20% of the students disagreed with that statement. After the programming, 2%. So a really big jump showing a pretty basic one, right?
Yeah, right.
Hopefully it's a pretty basic one. On the other hand, there are statements that are more complicated. There's one statement that says, for example, when the mother works, the children suffer. And we didn't see that much movement on moving towards disagreement with that from the students. And then I think about my own household, and I have a 7 and a 9-year-old. And if you said, would you rather mom worked or was at home, they would tell you they would rather that I would be at home. Mm-hmm. So these are issues that we face in many different places around the world. And even for my children who, at age 7, my daughter loves to be like, fireman, policeman, manhole. She's like, that's patriarchy. I'm like, yeah, it is, Hazel. So she has grown up understanding all of this, but she has very strong feelings about mom working too much. Mm-hmm. It's because I like my job a lot as well. And in a household where my husband still does day trading, but he's predominantly a stay-at-home dad. And so even in a household that is pretty progressive in terms of gender norms and roles, they stick, and they stick for kids. So all to say, really cool movement on, I think there might have been, what did I say, 4, 4, 6, was that 14? I'm bad at math. I can crunch quantitative data, but basic math is not my strength. Right?
I think that's 14, yeah.
14? 14 out of the 23 questions, we saw significant changes in the students. And then I literally crunched the data, as mentioned, on Friday for the teachers. And we saw maybe 2 questions where there were significant changes. But when you look at the data, that's because the teachers were starting at a place where we're like, okay, more agreement with gender equal statements. So they were starting from a higher level of knowledge about gender equality than the students were. So, mm-hmm.
But so you're not doing that same work in Indonesia then?
No. So we took a different path in Indonesia where we worked with healthcare workers and also students on programming that connected environmental stressors such as water scarcity and gender norms there. But because of my long-term engagement with Peru, I've really kind of taken the ball in Peru with our colleagues there and pushed it a bit further.
But your colleague is still doing work in Indonesia?
Yes.
As well?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we still have team members who are working on those topics. And then I was asked to be a research associate at UNPAD, Loyola University, which is in Bandung, Indonesia. And for that, in the past year, I did a workshop series for predominantly women faculty about international publishing. So a lot of action research is not always perfectly even nor systematic. In most of the cases, it's responding to the requests of our partners and how does that align with our capacity to help. And in that case, I was asked to help with women faculty.
Can you talk a little bit about how teenage pregnancy ties into all of this then as well?
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people, when you say water insecurity and gender-based violence, the connection is not always obvious. And then you say, well, in the households, this happens. The relationship to teenage pregnancy is even a bit more of a mental jump. But teenage pregnancy there are lots of factors that are involved in that. And the way that it connects with water is that in households that don't have water, it is the women and the children, and it's selectively the girls that must go get water. And the girls will not go to school if they haven't gotten the water that is needed for the household. So as girls have less and less access to education, that means also that their minds are not on professions that require education. And I want to be careful to not say we're all moving towards this place where both partners are working and we're, like that's not some sort of evolution that we're going towards. But in Peru and in many places, still the norm is that the mom is at home. And I know from staying at home is a bigger job than it was the most difficult job I ever did, was staying at home with the kids. So that's the pathway. But often if young people have their eyes on occupations that require an education, then they'll say, I can't have kids early because you can't always pay for children and then education. It's a difficult pathway. But if someone doesn't have those eye on those jobs and says, well, my goal is to be a mother and to stay at home, they sometimes accelerate that journey into the teenage years because that's what the option is. And that's the option perhaps because of cultural expectations, but also because of compromised access to education. And the other component, which doesn't really connect to water, but is about reproductive choice. But we are working in Catholic communities. I'm at a Catholic university, and I have to keep my anthropological hat on to respect the fact that you cannot go into these communities and say, well, why don't you use birth control? It's not culturally appropriate. And so what are other ways? Well, we say choice. Perhaps reproductive choice, that would be good. I think that would still be good. That's maybe later down the line. But choice of girls not missing school because they are collecting water and getting an education and saying, if I want to be a stay-at-home mom, that's great. If I want to pursue a professional occupation, that's great. We just want to make sure that both boys and girls have equal opportunities to choose where they want to be. And if they choose that they want to have a family in their teenage years, okay, as long as people, if that's their choice and their desire, I think that's the biggest component that's important to me.
And are the governments in these countries, do you work with the governments in Indonesia and Peru to improve violence against women, education, water scarcity?
There's different levels. So we think about our partnerships on the community level and then on the local level, and those are the strongest because we are embedded within these communities, and our partnerships, for example, with Fe y Alegría. So Fe y Alegría is the Jesuit nonprofit that is responsible for Jesuit public education, and Fe y Alegría is in the communities where we work. They're in the region that we work in. They're nationally represented and they're internationally represented. So that's it's not quite the government, but connected to the government. And so our closest partners are on that local level, but we are getting our results up, and continuing to reinforce those relationships so that we can bring our science to the people who can make changes for it. In terms of when we think of the government, because we are working with a really wonderful Sister Marlene, and she's a nun who is in charge of the Fe y Alegría network that we're working with on the northern Peruvian coast. You go anywhere with Sister Marlene and you're okay, because she knows everybody. And we went to go see the mayor, it was the governor of the region of Piura, and we got in because of Sister Marlene. We got stopped by the police, got out of that because of Sister Marlene, and she's she's the bee's knees. And Sister Marlene is helping us to be able to get our policy briefs into the hands of both local and regional policymakers. And a quick example of how that leads to more research and connections with both the nonprofit and governmental worlds is we went last October to Peru, and I always bring students with me. So I was with three of my students, Grace, Sophia, and Willa. And Sister Marlene set up a meeting for us, and the mayor came in, and also the governmental organization called Cefodia, which I can't remember what the full Spanish acronym is, but they work specifically on adolescent issues. And we said, we've been doing these gender equality workshops, this is what we're seeing. We've been working on the water component, but there's still a lot to be done. And I didn't even talk about the full next project. I digress.
We can go. Yeah. We can get into that too.
And again, these are Catholic communities, and I am very close with the Jesuit community here at Loyola. Many of the Jesuits have worked extensively in Peru, so there's a whole network of people who are interested in supporting communities and young people in pursuing social and environmental justice. So we were talking all about that in the meeting, and Cefodia, the government organization, said, can you do integral ecology programming for 50 students across 25 high schools? And integral ecology comes from, I don't have the book, but I have this thing here. My friend Pope Francis, rest in peace. So Pope Francis published the book Laudato Si, which was an encyclical on climate change and social inequality. And he put forward the idea of integral ecology, which at its most base is that everything is interconnected. And so environmental issues are social issues translate into environmental issues. And his point is the science is very, very important, but the issues are so severe that we really need to be thinking about how we can appeal to larger swaths of the world to make changes in their own lives on different levels. And so I think in April, we're going to be launching. That's the next meeting I have after we'll be speaking. So we have been co-designing integral ecology programming for these high school students with Loyola students here, with my colleague, Brother Mark Mackey, who is a Jesuit and ecologist and a special in integral ecology. In January, we will begin the dynamic back and forth of the programming. So we had some ideas that are rooted in the reading and all the stuff that we find, and then we give it to our partners at Cefodia, Fe y Alegría, and we say, what do you think? And we keep it very bare bones intentionally because we don't want to just be like, have fun, right? That's coming from us. That's not co-creation. So we will bounce the programming back and forth, back and forth. Hopefully by March, we'll have the programming finalized. I'll come together with my research team. We will design a research project around that to say, well, what are the goals of this programming and how do we measure whether we're actually able to reach those goals with these students? And then the end part of that program is for each student pair, so it'll be a boy and a girl from the 25 high schools, to develop a proposal for a project that will promote social and environmental justice in their high schools. And so they will bring it back to their high schools. And our hope is that through that capacity building, through this appeal to both science and spirituality, that people feel moved to make change in their communities, which is exciting.
It is. It sounds like a good program.
I think so. It's exciting.
You've done some work with indigenous communities and their knowledge of medicinal plants in Peru. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It was a long time ago. I think I was 21. So when I'll back up a little bit. I was able to visit an indigenous community, a Shuar community, when I was 16 in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And while I was there, I was able to speak with community members, and they told me that they were worried about the highways that were being built and how that was leading to deforestation, and without the forest, livelihoods and cultures and health suffer. And that inspired me to become a scientist. And I went from a not so great student, I would say maybe C's. After that experience, I had focus. I wanted to work with indigenous populations in the Amazon to understand how environmental stressors were influencing health and well-being. So I got my act together, and enough that they somehow let me into Johns Hopkins, and I studied neuroscience and immunology because I've always been interested in the biology of how our environments get under the skin to influence our health, specifically immunological functioning. But then I was missing the whole component of where I wanted to work. So I got a $500 grant, and I moved to Peru, and I lived in a biological station as a resident naturalist. And my project, which was done with Dr. Armando Valdez Velasquez, who's a good friend of mine, he was the director for an NGO And together, we created this idea to ask, what are the most common health problems in this area of the Peruvian Amazon? We were in the Manu biosphere, so in the southern, so geographically challenged, southeastern region. What are the most common health issues, and what are the medicinal plants that people use to treat those health issues? And then to create a medicinal plant garden. And I learned a lot through that. Number one was that I was being silly, and I was very young and naive. And I thought if you made a book that had the most common illness, almost like the idea had been, if you open up a medicine cabinet and you have a cough, what do you reach for? I don't know, whatever, a cough drop or something. That you could have a garden, and that people would have a book, and if they felt sick, they could go to the garden, and it would say how you would prepare the plant, and there you go. It's like a medicine cabinet, but in the Amazon, and it's utilizing traditional ecological knowledge. Healing is a relationship with a practitioner. And if you're just on your own doing that, people are not really going to do it. It depends upon somebody who has a specialization in that, and you go to them and you tell them, and then they use their knowledge. And then that's just the tip of the iceberg about what the healing relationship is all about. So I quickly realized that my idea was very Western, and was neglecting what the healthcare landscape, at least the kind of traditional healthcare landscape, really was like in this area, number one. Number two, I made a garden with like paths. Nobody does, I got out into the field, and you realize that people just grow the plants around their house. There's no little, like how Western, again, of me. And then the other thing that I realized was, while people are concerned about health, illness, medicinal plants, loss of knowledge, they were more concerned about the expansion of mining and oil extraction in their areas, because that was contaminating their water. And I didn't even have water on my mind about 20 years ago. And so I went back the year after, and I filmed a documentary that was focused on hunt oil in this area, and then we snuck into some of Huaypetwe, Delta Uno, which is one of the worst areas. I mean, it's literally rainforest, and then it looks like the surface of the moon. Everything has been deforested. It's very, very sad. And we snuck into the mines, and we interviewed people. And one of the important components is, we often vilify people who are engaged in mining, but the reality is these are people who are just trying to take care of their children. I'm not talking about the higher ups. I'm talking to the people who are actually doing the mining. And so it's just a very, very complicated landscape to understand health and changes in lifestyle and how people are able to attend to their needs. So that was a very roundabout way of talking about medicinal plant knowledge.
But in those communities, were there still shamans then?
Somewhat. Not as many as previously. And as market-based lifestyles increase, you have to commodify that. And so you would have a lot of shamans who were then working with predominantly white Westerners who were coming in, who were wanting to do ayahuasca and have healing experiences. So it's getting all muddy. So that's changed. And so that was in the southern Peruvian Amazon. And then years later, I did my doctoral research. I lived for a year in an Awahun community in the northern Peruvian Amazon. And that's an even more interesting, well, not even more interesting, but also a very interesting manifestation, where in the 1940s and 50s, evangelists came into the area. There's a bigger context behind it. But basically they said that the shamans were working with the devil. All of that was satanic work. And there was the systematic pushing out of the shamans. At the same time, the core beliefs in what causes illness, in that case, in many areas, witchcraft. So the idea being that if someone gets sick, it's usually because someone else is mad at them, and they've sent like invisible illness darts into them, and it's witchcraft, brujeria, magia, and black magic. And you need a shaman who can go into with you a altered state, usually through ayahuasca or other hallucinogenic plants, and then they'll take that out. They'll suck it out and get rid of it. So the belief that illness is originating from bad juju coming from someone else persists. The shamans that can help you deal with that are gone because of evangelists and other changes as well, kind of the market-based shifts as well. So right now, the work that I continue to do in indigenous Amazonian communities is on sanitation, because there's enough water, but the water is being contaminated because, and I can tell you from living for a year where my bathroom was a hole in the ground, and I noticed that the water, when it would rain a lot, the water in my hole would go up, and I'd be like, oh, super. All of the things that are going into that hole of the ground are going into the river, where we're collecting our water from drinking, and we're swimming, and we're bathing, and we're doing all of this. So since I left, they did a water infrastructure project where they're bringing in piped water that is cleaner from the mountains into the households. Great. But everybody still uses the river because everybody's always used the river for generations and generations. So we are working with the community to understand how we can support them in a larger sanitation project, which again, okay, put in a septic tank. Who's going to empty that septic tank? You are in the middle of nowhere across a river. So we really have to think creatively about community-based sustainable solutions, or else we're going to spend time and energy and money on things that are not fixing the problem and can often cause more problems.
I want to go back to the water insecurity thing and violence. Has anyone looked at this from like an urban perspective then?
That's a great question. Yes-ish. The majority of the research has been conducted in kind of rural areas where people are walking long distances, as we discussed. However, when you have urban areas where people are in tighter quarters and you don't have access to water, you don't have the issue of walking a long way, but you have the issue of violence emerging within households. And then also, if the water's not going to the households, but you're still in kind of a city, urban-y area, at the water points, because you have a higher density of people, you have more competition. And it has to do with money a lot of times. And there are some very interesting papers coming out of Southern Asia about violence at water points, water access points. So you do see that. And you also have, I mean, in many, many places, but often when you have urban, high-density living, you have an increased risk for contamination because there's more people.
Well, because I know a lot of these huge cities like Mexico City, the aquifers
Are being depleted.
Yeah.
It's going to keep, the issue's going to continue to grow in all places.
Right. And here it says, scientists predict by 2050 more than half of the global population will live in areas that will suffer from water scarcity for at least a month each year.
Yeah. We keep getting close to day zero where there's no water in Cape Town and in the Middle East. Here in the United States, we often don't think about it, but we have many communities, often indigenous communities, for example, in Alaska, that have issues, Native American populations whose water is tainted with uranium because the government has preferentially disposed of their radioactive materials on Native American reservations. It's all here. And I went through breast cancer and I have a genetic predisposition, but I would bet you that all of the microplastics and all of the other stuff that's being pumped in the water system probably didn't make my situation any less likely. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
So we all will be impacted. And then when we think also about the current political context where we are continuing to turn away people who are trying to immigrate to the global north because of many, many, many factors. But we are going to have climate change induced or resource scarcity induced migration increasing for the foreseeable future. And for those things, I do not have a solution.
Yeah.
Actually, I do.
Oh, you do?
I do.
What is the solution?
I think we have to shift. We need a cultural revolution. We are embedded in a world, and it's even more intense right now with AI just going produce, 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 consume, consume, consume. And that base model of what is important to us and what we think is valuable is, and this is going back to Pope Francis, is going back to how we live our lives. And how we live our lives, and this Western model of success continues to spread around the globe, and it continues to cause environmental havoc, social havoc, again, infectious disease continuing to exist, but now alongside chronic disease risk. We need to all ask ourselves what's truly important to us, and begin to live in alignment with that, which is not an easy, easy solution, but I think that's what's at the heart of these issues.
Because you did a little film on that too, right? Where technology like satellites and cell phones and all these things are in these smaller indigenous communities now.
Mm-hmm. And it creates huge stress, because it's not to say that prior to the entrance, which is really in the last decade to 15 years of the entrance of satellites and phones and all of this in the communities in which I work, it's not to say that life wasn't hard before. It was hard. And it's not to romanticize what it was before, decades and decades before that. It's still difficult to live with high levels of infectious disease and et cetera. The issue is when you have access to TV, and especially now social media and phones, I mean, we're starting to see it in our own cultural context. You can compare yourself. So when I worked at the Field Museum of Natural History, we often thought about assets and strengths and existing resources. And when people can meet their basic needs, for example, again, kind of with my background working with indigenous Amazonian populations, if you can make your house from the forest, if you can eat the fish out of the river, if you can have your masato, which is your chewed yucca fermented beer, so you can hang out with your community and celebrate and do those things, that can be a very good life. Even though you could, on paper, make zero money, so if you're looking at national comparisons, you're in extreme poverty, but that's not a poverty of a quality of life because your needs are being met. But what happens is, as the Shuar initially told me when I was 16, you take away the forest, you can't build your houses. You overfish the river, the fish are this big, you can't live off of that. Then there becomes a need to import the cookies, the crackers, the et cetera. And then you overlay on that, what's this person have? I don't have what they have. I want what they have, but there are structural barriers to getting that. And what is that? It's typically money. But among the Awahun, I did a lot of asking what is important in life, and people consistently said to get an education, to have a professional job, to be able to make money so I can have a nice life. And that's a very Western model. And I trace that back to the evangelists who worked intensively in those communities through both the church and through the schools. There's a lot.
Right. But it's going to be a tall task, right? Because, like you said, unfortunately it's bled into every community around the world. This desire for make money, buy things, status.
I think we are at the tip of realizing, like, for example, just being very blinders on and thinking about the United States. Our young people are under a lot of stress right now. And COVID certainly influenced things, but and having children and seeing my students, again, I'm not quantitatively investigating this, but my observations are that social media and phones and our lives lived on computers is not improving quality of life. There's so much anxiety, so many depressive symptoms, so much disempowerment for how do we create change. And now all the studies are coming out of, what do they call it, brain rot. All the things that if you're around young people you can see. They go to the cafeterias and they're all the students. The students are sitting in a group of 5, nobody's talking. They're all on their phones, eating, and then the only thing that they say to the other is to look at the phone.
Yeah.
It's getting bad. Which may have to happen for us as a society and us as a world to say, is this what we want? Is this consumption both the media consumption and all the things that we're buying, is this making us happy and healthy? I don't think so. And I think we have to get to a point where we go, you know what? We need to rethink what we're doing. I think that that's happening. But it's urgent that it happen quickly and on a widespread scale if we are going to possibly avoid going over. We're already past many of the global tipping points. Mm-hmm. And I don't like to get bogged down because what am I going to do? I like solutions. And so my solution going into next semester from a good colleague of mine, Dr. Ping Jing, who's in the School of Environmental Sustainability, all of the faculty, oh, they don't show up, and they're this, and they're that, and the excuses, and Dr. Jing said, now at the beginning of her semester, she is giving the students the opportunity to do a change of life activity. For them to ask themselves, what are activities that I can do that will support my health, well-being, or environmental sustainability? Have those actions, chart them over 8 weeks, journal about what's going on, and see how they feel that their own life or their community life is improving. We need to give tools to people to say, yes, I can. And yes, I can in small ways, and I can do it in big ways as well. And I think we can chip away at this issue.
It's an optimistic view. I like that.
I'm so pessimistic with so many things that I rant and rave about that I always try to end on the optimistic, or else it's really depressing.
Right. Well, that's probably a good point to end on. I think that's, you have to have a little bit of optimism, right?
Yeah.
Because there's certainly a torrent of bad things happening.
There's always hope.
Yeah.
And when I was going through breast cancer and I was thinking about death all the time and leaving my children motherless, I had hope. And I'm here and I'm healthy and I don't take my time on this planet or with my family or with fabulous colleagues for granted. And I truly believe that we have the resources and capabilities to take on the most urgent challenges of our time, and we can do it best together.
Great. Well, thank you, Paula. It's been a pleasure.
It's been wonderful being here with you.